Hey everyone, and welcome to RUBIN'S Mind Lab, where we break down the latest research into what it really means. Ever wondered how we tell someone about a bunch of things at once? Do we name them one by one, or point out something they all have in common? It seems simple, but it turns out there is a whole science behind it, and it can really affect how quickly and accurately people understand what we're talking about today. We're diving into a fascinating study that explores just that. So imagine you're playing a game or trying to follow instructions. You're shown a bunch of things, maybe on a screen, and someone needs to tell you which ones are important. How they tell you can make a big difference. The researchers here wanted to figure out the best way to do this. Should you list each thing by its location, like, it is the one at A, then B, San, then CR? Or should you say something like, find all the blue ones? They looked at how fast people could do it, how often they made mistakes, and even how well they remembered what they were told to find. This is the first study to really dig into comparing these different methods systematically. They had people look at a grid with slew abstract objects. Then they'd hear instructions telling them to find a certain group of these objects. The instructions either gave the locations of each object, like find AAC, CR and DC, or they described a shared feature, like find the blue objects. They tested how fast people could click on all the correct objects and how many mistakes they made. They also added a memory test, where after identifying a group, people had to say if a particular object was part of that group. Now, for the exciting part, what did they find? Well, it is not as simple as one way being always better. It really depends on what kind of shared feature you are talking about and how many objects you need to find. When the shared feature is something really obvious, like color, think of all the blue shirts in a closet, then telling people find the blue ones is actually faster and leads to fewer mistakes, especially when there are a few of them to find. This is because our brains are really good at spotting something like color quickly. It is like a visual shortcut. But what if the shared feature isn't so obvious? Like, imagine a bunch of objects that are all dotted. That is a less salient feature. In these cases, the study found that listing the locations, even though it is more words, can actually be faster and more accurate. It seems that trying to find a group based on a subtle pattern can be tricky. And it is easier for our brains to process specific locations when the shared characteristic isn't as striking. Let's break this down a bit more. The group size is how many objects you need to find. Longer phrases like find the blue objects are shorter than listing coordinates, especially for many objects, but if the feature is hard to spot like a pattern, then listing coordinates might be faster even though it is more words. This is where that visual efficiency hypothesis comes in. It suggests that sometimes longer instructions are better if they help your brain search more efficiently. It is a trade-off between how many words you say and how much thinking your listener has to do. They also found that, as expected, the more objects you have to find, the longer it takes, no matter how you describe them. Looking at the graphs, you can see this clearly. When it is color, using the shared feature is faster, especially as you need to find more blue things. But when it is patterns, listing locations is generally faster, although for a group of 4 patterned objects, the difference starts to even out. Accuracy is also super important. When people were told to find objects based on a common color, they made fewer mistakes if they were told the color. But for patterns, it was the opposite. When the instructions focused on a pattern, people made more errors, especially as the group size grew. This reinforces the idea that less obvious features are harder to work with. They even noted that in the location condition, people sometimes clicked on the wrong spot because the coordinates sounded similar or they missed objects altogether, especially when trying to find several of them. What about memory? Interestingly, the study found that how well people remembered the group they identified didn't really change based on whether they were given a shared feature or coordinates. This suggests that once you've successfully found the objects, your memory of them is pretty much the same regardless of the instruction method. And how difficult did people say it was? Surprisingly, participants didn't report a big difference in how hard they found each method. Most people didn't have a strong preference, although a few more thought the shared feature method was a bit harder. This is interesting because the actual performance differences were quite clear in the data. So, what is the big takeaway here? It is that there is no single best way to refer to a group of objects. It is all about context. If you are dealing with a striking feature like color, using that to describe the group is efficient. It is like a mental shortcut for your listener. But if the feature is less obvious, like a pattern, it might be better to just give specific locations, even if it means saying more words. This is because the mental effort of trying to find a subtle pattern can be higher than processing a list of coordinates. This research is also really important for computer science, especially in how we design systems that need to communicate with humans. Think about a pilot in a cockpit or a controller watching a lot of drones. If there is a critical issue and you need to quickly identify a group of drones that are all flashing red, telling the controller those red ones is going to be much faster and more accurate than listing their grid positions. But if it is a less urgent situation, say checking battery levels for a few specific drones, then giving their exact locations might be just fine, or even better if you want to avoid cluttering the display with too many visual cues. Now, like all research, this study has its limits. The objects they used were pretty simple, just shapes and basic colors and patterns. Real-world objects are a lot more complex. Also, because they did this online, they measured how long it took to click everything, which is a mix of how long it took to find things and how long it took to decide they were done searching. Future studies, maybe using eye tracking, could give us a more detailed look at exactly what people are looking at and when they stop their search. And for those tricky, less salient features like patterns, they're not entirely sure if giving more and more coordinates for larger groups would eventually become better than a shared feature. That is something for future research to explore. What I really love about this study is how it shows that even seemingly simple communication acts like pointing out objects involve a complex interplay between our perception, our language, and the context. It is a great reminder that the efficiency of communication isn't just about how few words you use, but also about how well those words help your listener understand and act. It makes me think about how we give directions or describe things in our daily lives. Maybe next time I am telling someone about a group of items, I'll consider the salience of the shared feature. What do you think about these findings? Do you find it easier when people describe groups by common features or by listing locations? Let me know in the comments below, and if you enjoyed this dive into the science of communication. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to RUBIN'S Mind Lab for more fascinating research, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next exploration into the human mind. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.